Hello, hello, hello. It's not where we start, ladies and gentlemen. It's where we finish. I'm Anthony Gafa, and you're watching Unfiltered with Gafa. Do you want to be working for the rest of your life? There needs to be a healthy combination. There needs to be a little bit of both. Because while we're fit and able and willing and able, I think we need to put in those extra hours now so we can capitalize on the income that we're earning and do what is the best thing for us. For me personally, it was investing in property. Within the horse racing industry, we do long hours whether you like it or not. So it comes with the territory to do those long hours. But it doesn't mean you need to continue to piss it up against the wall. With the extra money you're earning, you need to invest it wisely. There are so many different methods, and you can talk to experts. Should I do crypto? Should I invest with a large financial group? My advice is to make a start. You should consider investing in property. Now, there are different options. Yes, you do need a big deposit. Yes, you do need money up front. Yes, you do need a consistent income. Yes, you need to have worked at the same place for a period of time. Now, all these things are important, but not mandatory, because there's more than one way to skin a cat. You need to make a sacrifice, is what you need to do. Like I said earlier, you can't keep pissing your money up against the wall and then get the shits while your friends are buying houses. There are many options, and there are generous schemes that can help you get into your first home. I think it's clear we're probably not going to buy a farm on your first round, depending where you are, of course. But typically, you're going to need to buy something that's going to double dip, generate an income, and grow in value. Unless you're going for the first home buyer's grant, then you need to live in it for the first 12 months. Now, let's just leave that aside for the moment. You need to determine whether you want an apartment or a house. It all comes down to your budget. Whether you're in the Sydney region, Brisbane, Melbourne, you can purchase an apartment for $500,000-$600,000 still. So that may be an option. I'm not very big on apartments, but if I am going to buy an apartment or guide someone down that path, which I just have on a number of occasions, I'll always ensure that there's enough square meters in that apartment. So you might buy a studio apartment. If you buy a studio apartment, it needs to be more than 35 square meters, because a studio can be converted into a one-bedroom, subject to strata, subject to a lot of things, of course. But by converting it into a one-bedroom, overnight, you've earned 10 to 15%. By buying a house, you'll need more money because you're not going to buy a house for $600,000-$700,000 in a city anymore. However, $700,000 still buys you a place in a country town or an hour from one of the main cities in Australia. So why wouldn't you consider that as an option? Buying a house that can be renovated, you might pick something up for $700,000. You drop $20,000 or $30,000 into a renovation, all of a sudden it's gone up, potentially up to 10, 20% overnight, just by doing a simple renovation. You can then engage a granny flat builder or a private certifier and knock up a granny flat out the back. You got a $700,000 property, drop $250,000 on a granny flat, and next thing you know, you've got a property that's positively geared, making money for you. Not a lot of moving parts. You get an agent to manage it, 2 incomes. You can get it revalued and move on to the second property. This all comes back to working in the horse racing industry, because we We work long hours. We haven't got time to start learning about crypto or release that app you want to do or launch that business on the side. So why not engage a buyer's agent or a professional in that space, or do it yourself if you can, to go and buy that house where you can knock up a granny flat out the back, or go and buy that apartment, that studio apartment that's way undervalued, convert it into a one better, and watch that property's value grow overnight. At the same time, you might be living in it, so you might be eligible for the first home buyer's grant. Or it might be a better option for you just to be an investor and use the rent off that property to get a greater loan. Or you might want to rent that property out, use the income of the rent to rent that property out so you can borrow more money and buy a bigger apartment. Because if you buy a bigger apartment, you might reach into a 50 square meter apartment that's a one better. You could convert that into a 2-bedroom apartment. Again, grows in value overnight and generates more rent because it's a 2-better. So look for the upside. Of course, if you are buying an apartment, be careful, there's strata. I tend to lean towards older blocks, older building blocks in a better region, in a better location, where the supply and demand is suited to your apartment. Because if there's a lot of apartments that are vacant, you could be sitting empty and not generate any income. But if you buy in a good area, close to town, close to transport, close to hospitals, you'll never have a day where you haven't got a tenant in there, because it's hard to get housing at the moment. But having said all that, what do you do once you've secured your first property? Well, 12 months in or 2 years in, if you've knocked up that granny flat or converted it into a 2-bedroom from a 1-bedroom, or a 1-bedroom from a studio apartment, it's time to get a valuation once again. Get it revalued, because you'll have equity against that property, generating an income. And why wouldn't you jump into your next one? Keep in mind, you're working all those hours. You're up at 4 o'clock in the morning doing horses, working split shifts, doing long days. Invest so your money is working for you in the background. You don't want to turn into a 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old who's managed to get down to the pub every Friday night and Saturday night and never missed a beat, never missed a song at karaoke, never missed a party, always there with his mates. But then at the end, he's the guy that's homeless because he hasn't invested his money. I'm not saying property is the be-all and end-all, but who wants to work till you're 75 years old? Why wouldn't you think ahead? And there will be a time when your wage working in the horse industry is just not going to cut it anymore. You know, you may have bought one property, got a bit of growth, second one, got a bit of growth. However, you need to be able to service the loan. So generating enough income to service the loan on those couple of properties will work. So now your properties have grown in value, and the income they're producing, the rent you're getting from those properties, is just enough to service your loans. You're 1 or 2 properties deep, and now you want to get another one. You go and have that meeting with the bank, whether it's ANZ, Commonwealth, Westpac, one of the big 4, and they turn around and tell you you can't service another loan. You haven't got enough money. This is when you need to sit down with a professional and ask the question, what can I do now? I've got a property in Bathurst or Bow Desert. I've got an apartment in the eastern suburbs or Brisbane. However, the income on those properties is only enough to service those loans, and I can't invest further. You've got a few options. Go to a second-tier lender. Lean on the parents for a bit of equity. Do a joint venture with somebody. Or what I like to recommend is make the switch. What do I mean by making the switch? You've invested in a couple of residential properties, whether it's an apartment or a house. They're getting good income, but not great. Now it's time to switch. It's make a change. jump over to the commercial sector. Go and buy a factory or an office or something along those lines. Get some advice. Go and speak to a buyer's agent, a commercial buyer's agent, someone who's a specialist in that space, and go and look for 6% return, 7% return. So it's going to balance out your portfolio. You've got properties that are growing in value, generating an income, but it's not great. Your income is at that certain point because, let's face it, the horse industry pays okay, but it's not the highest paying job. Now you need to lean on commercial property. Commercial property is going to give you a good return. And if you play your cards right, you don't have to come up with a lot of the deposit. You can find something with a good lease in place, a good whale, good term on the lease, and the bank will start wanting to do business with you once again. So am I qualified to talk about this? I don't tick the box of a qualification, but I love this space. I'm very passionate about this space. For me personally, I bought my first property when I was 18 years old, and I've managed to grow a portfolio. But Anthony, it's so hard for the younger generation coming through. Well, that's a crock of shit. You want to go and buy a property for $600,000? A 5% deposit, only $30,000. If you can't save a $35,000 deposit, you're kidding yourself. Make some sacrifices. Shared accommodation. Stop going out every weekend. Still go out once a month. But you need to sacrifice. Get a second job. Stack shelves at night. On the other hand, if you don't want to go with the 5% deposit, well, put a plan in place. Understand how much money you need to earn. How do you raise 10%? Are you going to pay a little bit more, a 0.5% more on the interest rate to get that loan sooner, to beat the property prices rising and rising? So maybe paying 0.5% more on an interest rate is not the end of the world. Maybe going to a second-tier lender isn't the end of the world. Maybe what you can do is go to a bank, sit down with a bank manager or a broker for that matter, and ask them, how much money do I need? If I want to buy a property for X amount of dollars, what's the minimum deposit? Can I use 100% of the income off that property I purchase to come into the equation of my income to ensure I can borrow as much as possible to get into that market? The longer you leave it, the harder it gets. You've got an income. You've got a second income. You've got an income off that property. You're now not pissing your money up against the wall every Friday and Saturday night. You're doing it once a month instead. There is so many different opportunities to get involved in real estate. It's not hard. It's only as hard as what you're making it. I've given advice to over 100 people to get into this space. Why wouldn't you make some changes, commit to property, and get your investment journey started?